This film is a fictionalized account of events taking place between 2001 and 2029. This is a work of fiction. Names, characters, businesses, places, events, locales, and incidents are either the products of the author's imagination or used in a fictitious manner. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or actual events is purely coincidental. In 2020, a virus named SARS-29 spreads rapidly across the world, disrupting lives, economies, and eventually governments. In its aftermath, the world sinks into a deep and severe economic depression, unparalleled in all of modern history. The worst, however, is yet to come. On April 3rd, 2022, a wave of unexplained deaths hits New York City. Over 300,000 people die in less than 24 hours. Only a week later, on April 10th, the CDC announces a new mutation of the virus named SARS-29. The new virus activates latent SARS-29 infections in the spinal fluid of recovered and previously asymptomatic patients, causing paralysis, strokes, heart attacks, and in the majority of cases, instant death. Over 600 million people die between June and August. A vaccine is developed in December 2022, but is not widely available for another 6 months. By August 2023, SARS-29 has claimed the lives of over 1.5 billion people. The SARS pandemic, however, is far from over. In January 2024, NATO, Russian, and Chinese troops returning home from the Middle East begin dying en masse, despite having received vaccinations to SARS-29. The new virus is identified as SARS-24. In the majority of cases, patients die suddenly after being asymptomatic carriers for several weeks. 2 billion lives are lost to SARS-24 in 2024. The final case of SARS-24 is recorded on October 1st, 2027. The total worldwide death toll from the SARS viruses stands at over 4 billion. The following is a documentary presentation of those that have survived the SARS pandemics. These are their stories, recorded during 2029.
Most of us will remember at the height of the pandemics, it became rare to see a plane in the sky. However, not all flights were grounded. We now go to New Delhi, India, to talk with a former pilot who flew during the pandemics. Arjun, can you confirm your name and tell us your occupation for the camera?
Hi, my name is Arjun Singh. I used to fly cargo planes for the Indian military services during 2024 pandemic. My job was to bring medical supplies to the other countries.
Where did you travel during this time?
My job back then was flying to Rome, Moscow, Tel Aviv.
And flying over the Middle East, what was that like?
I had actually been flying over Iran when I saw one of the nukes go off. It was like a fireworks show from a plane. Only instead of bursts of sparks, you saw bright, intense lights below and heard distant rumbling like thunder.
Some say that no one survived the fallout from that in Iran. What was it like flying after that?
Well, I guess you could say it was surreal. All night, the lights of the city and highway over Iran were gone. It was dark, as if we were flying over the ocean. Sometimes we would bring our plane down to see what happened to Iran. if there was anyone or anything left, but we could never see anything.
Many of us can recall a time when we could no longer call 911 because there was no one there to answer the call. However, not all officers left their jobs during the pandemics. We now travel to Sedona, Arizona to talk with a former policeman. Hello, Christopher. Can you tell us what it was like being a police officer during the pandemics?
It was not fun. Most of the officers quit their jobs during the SARS-29 pandemic. Nobody wanted to be the one that arrested a suspected SARS case, then get sick, then potentially kill their entire family. Some of us stayed though, even after we stopped getting our paychecks. It was our moral duty as officers to protect the towns that we lived in.
What did you have to do during that time?
We certainly weren't handing out parking tickets by the end of 2022. No. So during the second pandemic, my job quickly transitioned to one where I was basically just answering phones and helping people that were being attacked or robbed or raped. Basically just going out and helping anybody whose life was in jeopardy.
How did you handle anyone breaking the law?
Well, it all depended on the severity of the crime. If somebody was engaging in a minor offense, for example, I would just yell at them over the loudspeaker of my patrol car and just give them a warning. Most of the time they would just stop what they're doing and just run off, and that'd be the end of it. Had to do that with a few looters actually, and to be honest, if the store owners had died, it would pretty much just be expected that the place would get looted, even by former officers of the law. It was at that point I didn't even bother with that anymore.
And how did you deal with bigger offenses?
Well, most people behaved rather responsibly and conscientiously. But when the prisons were all abandoned and a lot of the felons had escaped, those were the people I usually had to deal with. And they were usually shoot-to-kill situations. I wouldn't even give them a warning. I would just pop them in the back of their head and leave them there for the coyotes.
How did those things change during the third pandemic?
At that point, all the bad apples had fallen from the tree, and our town was safe. My job then was just to close off all the roads and make sure nobody tried to get in.
Did anyone get in?
Oh yeah, we've had a few stragglers from big cities that tried to get in. Most likely trying to loot any of the abandoned houses for canned goods. But our solution to that was we would hang up what we called scarecrows, which were the dead bodies of the people that we shot. We would hang them up over the roads and the woods all over town, basically just as a way of saying, you know, if you enter our town, you will be shot.
Police departments weren't the only first responders that had trouble with staffing during the second pandemic. Ambulances often sat idle in many American cities, but not in this city. Our next interview takes us to Catherine Stiles, who drove ambulances during the second pandemic. Hi, Catherine. What was it like to drive ambulances during the pandemic?
It was interesting. Most of the ambulance drivers had died during the beginning of the second pandemic, so we were all recruited from a mental hospital. All of us were in there because we had made multiple attempts to kill ourselves. One day, these guys in suits came in during 2022, and they asked us if we wanted to leave the hospital and drive ambulances instead.
What did you say?
I said yes, and so did all the other patients.
Who else was recruited to drive ambulances during the pandemics?
Most of us were either suicidal or terminally ill patients, patients with cancer and other terminal diseases. We all just kind of said, fuck it, and drove the ambulances.
It's been said that one of the reasons the hospitals closed was because no one would go to them after SARS-29. Did you find you were busy during the pandemics?
We were busy, but our job wasn't driving sick people to the hospital. Most of the people that were sick were already dead during the second pandemic, so ambulances became what we called body bag wagons. People would call and report the smell of dead people. We would go to the houses, find the bodies, bag them up, and then drive them to the hospital to be incinerated. Eventually, the hospitals couldn't keep up with the number of body bags we were dropping off, so we had to bring them to landfills instead. Out of sight, out of mind.
Did most of the people you work with die?
I think I'm the only survivor. One of the lucky ones. The sad thing is, one of the people from the hospital came to me one day and she said that she was happy to be alive and that she regretted ever wanting to kill herself, and that now her job gave her meaning, and the next day she just up and dropped dead from SARS-29.
Well, it looks like you're doing okay now, right?
Keeping myself busy. Kind of about all you can do these days.
At the start of the first pandemic, our economy had been in a period of transition for well over a decade. People unable to find well-paying jobs have been shut out of the real economy and forced to take remedial work for companies as delivery drivers, ride-hailing services, and other things that often force them to take salaries below minimum wage and live a life of wage slavery. One survivor, Gan Moore, takes us to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania to recall his experience during the pandemic. Hi, Gan. Can you tell us what you did before, during, and after the pandemics?
So before the pandemics, I drove my car for it was a ride-hailing service. It was called Lightyear, and I never made much, just enough to pay the gas, afford car repairs, put food on the table. Excuse me. I lived at a friend's house. I slept on their couch because from 2010 on, I'm not sure how anybody could afford rent. And it felt like before the pandemics, every year rent prices just kept going up. It was another 100 each year. Well, each year you were lucky if you made as much as you did the year before. It got to a point where you could work 40 hours a week and you would just make enough to pay your rent and nothing else.
And how about during the pandemics? How did your job as a driver change?
Well, I mean, we weren't employees. We were just what were called gig workers back then. So we had no benefits, no paid time off, no severance, no unemployment. I mean, it was just the money from the work you could do.
And what happened once there was no more work?
Well, I mean, once there was no more people requesting rides, I mean, we had no way of making money. It was a crazy time. No one had ever dealt with anything like that before. And I mean, the system, it just broke. It just couldn't handle it. It just broke from all the stress and the strain. And at that point, people like me we were just left out.
And how did you survive after that?
Well, I was lucky. I had a friend. Helped me survive, gave me food, free place to stay. Many others were not as lucky.
And what about the second and third pandemics?
My friend passed away during the second pandemic, so I took over his house. I've been living here since. Once the new government took over and President Yang instituted the minimum guaranteed income, I've been able to take it easy and not sell my soul to the ride-hailing services like I had to do when I was younger. Now, I spend my time teaching cello lessons online.
Not everyone accepts the story that SARS was a natural or man-made, and some believe it's literally out of this world. Our next interview takes us to Billings, Montana, to speak with one of today's top online video celebrities who also happens to believe aliens caused the SARS pandemic. You are well known today as being a conspiracy theorist, the person who challenges the official narrative that Iran was the origin of SARS. How did you come to be known as the UFO guy or space alien nut as you're known in the news media today?
First off, before the revolution, I knew someone that worked at the Pentagon. His job was to investigate unexplained aerial phenomena. So much of what I have said over the years, it's from confidential information he provided to me while researching UFOs. Okay?
Many have said the reason your theories don't pan out is that they don't have any evidence to support them.
Yes, I completely agree. Okay, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. However, all of the records and files that I would use to substantiate my claims were lost during the revolution when Washington, D.C. burned to the ground. I mean, those fires took all of the evidence that we had collected for over a decade. And then most of the people who could corroborate my story mysteriously disappeared around 2027.
So, evidence aside, what is your theory about SARS?
Okay, SARS was planted here by an extraterrestrial civilization. It was meant either to decimate our population as a warning so that we'd stop destroying our planet, or it was the first part of a process to remove us from the Earth.
And what's the second part of that process?
It's hard to say. I believe they see us like we see trees. I mean, to them, we're just these giant stationary objects that don't move, or move really slowly, and that they believe probably aren't intelligent, akin to weeds that need to be removed.
So, what exactly do you know? How did you arrive at your conclusions?
They've been here for over 2 decades, our time, but it's been thousands or even millions of years for them. They're not like anything we've seen in the movies. They don't experience time like we do. In fact, if we experience time like they do, a Planck second of time would seem like a year, and the world around us would appear to have stopped and flow in very slow motion.
You said they've been here for over 2 decades. How do you know that?
Well, back in 2004, there was a Navy ship from the old American Republic, the USS Nimitz, I think it was called. Well, those fighter pilots were one of the first to even see them. I mean, they called them UFOs, or unidentified flying objects. And there's video on the internet of them, and radar picked them up like little tic-tacs flying in the sky, defying the laws of physics. And the reason they defied the laws of physics is because time works differently for them. I mean, for the aliens, they could be walking around like you or I, but if we could see them, they'd be going insanely fast. Like that comic book character, The Flash, where we'd see nothing at all, and they'd see us like frozen statues. Right? The only way they'd see us move is if they did a time lapse.
And how did you know that?
Well, in October 2017, I was hunting deep in these woods in Minnesota. And I heard what I thought was a freight train crashing or an explosion. And I thought when I got back to camp, I'd hear about it.
Hear about what?
I don't know. A terrorist attack? A plane crash? A factory somewhere blowing up? I mean, something that could explain what I heard. And I wasn't the only one to hear them. Thousands of others heard them across the world, all throughout the summer and fall of 2017. I mean, back then, the news and the government couldn't connect the dots, but they called them skyquakes. Right? The sound of explosions deep in the sky that no one could explain. You know, basically like a sonic boom.
One scientist wrote in response to your theory that those sonic booms or skyquakes could have been explained by meteors exploding in the atmosphere or methane being released in the soil that then created those noises referred to as skyquakes as it escaped. How would you answer that?
I would say use common sense. Okay, I heard the skyquake in October 2017, which also happened to be the month that the first interstellar object we ever detect passes by Earth. And it was on its closest approach to our planet. It was that asteroid with the weird Hawaiian name, Oumuamua. Right? And that asteroid had a trajectory that took it past Venus, Earth, and Mars. I mean, what are the odds that the first object from another solar system that we ever detect takes the same path a vessel would take if it were looking to learn about the 3 potentially habitable planets in our solar system? And then, to top it off, for reasons no one can explain, that interstellar object suddenly starts accelerating as it leaves our solar system. Right, if you ask me, that was one of their ships. It was dropping off baby probes that landed in our atmosphere and blew up before sending data back to the mama craft, making sure it was okay for the others coming down. I mean, the others arrived shortly thereafter. I mean, it's no surprise that just before the pandemic started, there were mass sightings of unexplained drone fleets in Colorado. That was them arriving. It wasn't some secret Iranian military drone operation, as some have alleged.